I know absolutely nothing about jazz, but I'm about to use a jazz analogy to frame this video. We will see how this goes. You know when the jazz trumpet guy is up there doing like the improvisational jazz thing? Although isn't all jazz made up? Anyway, he's up there doing that improvisational jazz thing, and to an outside observer or someone who doesn't know anything about jazz, what he's doing might seem kind of random, just pure sort of chaos. But I would imagine, at least I would imagine, that everything that he is doing, while it might not necessarily come with a lot of planning, there's a deliberateness to it. There's an intention around it. And I think if you knew and understood the mechanics of improvisational jazz, there would be a level of predictability to it. Every note is predictable on some level because every note is designed to accomplish something very specific. Every note is designed to create a specific reaction within the audience. This is something that good storytellers share with good jazz musicians. At least it's something I know that good storytellers do. Again, I have no idea about jazz. Calling a story predictable is often considered a derogatory term, and for good reasons. A story that is not surprising, where the reader can tell on every page exactly where the story is going, is not going to be engaging. On the other hand, a story whose elements come completely out of left field, that violates every single reader expectation and go in directions that nobody could possibly have predicted, are often just as bad. Any good story needs a level of predictability and needs to be predictable in the right ways. As much as writers don't like to think about it, and as much as audiences will deny it, predictable stories are often better. But a story needs to be predictable in the right way, just like a jazz trumpeter needs to trumpet together the right notes. You know what I have no trouble trumpeting? Subscribing to my channel, because you'll get to see more videos like this. Any story is going to have 4 major questions that the reader is asking as they go through it. What and where the story is going to end up at the ending, and how and why the characters are going to get there. What and where is the outcome of the story, or what the characters get from resolving the conflict? How is the methods they use to get there, and why is the motivations and reasons that the character used those methods or even pursued resolving the conflict in the first place? There's also a 5th one, when, but that only applies in time travel stories. Breaking reader expectations around any of those 4 questions can lead to dissatisfaction and will damage your story. Let's start with the what and the where. I don't really have a good reason for why we're doing that. This could be characters ending up in a relationship, the murderer ending up in prison, or Andy Dufresne ending up outside of prison. This is the reward that the character gets for their toil through the conflict of the story. A big part of what sets the where and what expectations are around genre. Genre conventions generally determine what a character is going to get out of a story and where we're going to end up at the end. Mysteries usually end up with a solved mystery. Romances end in marriage or sex or whatever. Usually the good guys win and the bad guys lose. Stories that subvert this need to be careful because ending up in a place the reader didn't expect can be problematic. You need to make sure that the reader desires the same things that the characters desire, and if the character is never going to get the things they desire, it's best to let the reader know that. Tragedies are the most prominent example of a story where the characters don't get what they want, or at least end up in a worse situation. And every single good tragedy lets the reader know that they are in fact watching or reading a tragedy. Tragedy is fundamentally built around this dramatic irony where the reader can see the path that the characters are on and knows it's not a good one, but the characters don't necessarily know that. Romeo and Juliet, probably one of the most well-known tragedies of all, tells you the outcome of the story in like the first stanza. Or maybe it's the second stanza. There is no doubt through the entirety of that play of where we're going to end up. The reader knows it's a tragedy. They know that the characters aren't going to get a happy ending. Next up is the why and the how. These are the motivations and methods employed by your characters to get what they want and end up where the story ends up. Here too, you need to adhere to predictability, at least to an extent. Having a character solve a conflict by means that have not been previously established is a less predictable way to solve a conflict, but it's also a suckier way to solve a conflict. If at the end of Shawshank it was revealed that... Oh, hold on. Spoilers. If at the end of Shawshank it was revealed that Andy dug his way from under that wall with a rock hammer that we never see him acquire, then the ending of that book/movie would have been a lot crappier. Instead, it's much better to show Andy getting the rock hammer and having another character remark how it would take 50 years to tunnel under the wall with it. You need to establish the bounds of capability that characters have and solve the conflict within the bounds of those capabilities. You can go a little bit beyond the bounds of capabilities, like digging through a wall in 20 years rather than 50 years, but you have to be especially careful with that. This is especially true if you're writing sci-fi or fantasy where you're establishing technologies or supernatural abilities, because solving the conflict beyond the bounds of what that technology or ability can do often leads to dissatisfaction. A similar idea applies with motivation. What and where your story ends up needs to align in some way with the motivations of your characters. Character motivations set up expectations because we expect characters to pursue things that are important to them. If your hard-boiled detective character is incredibly devoted to his family and raising his kids, yet he spends every waking hour working on a case that doesn't threaten them in any way and just neglects his family duties, then it's going to seem a little weird and the character motivations will ring a little bit hollow. If instead the character is trying to find an evil crime boss who has kidnapped his entire family, then that plotline fits a bit better. The character is pursuing something we would expect them to pursue. I think in the best cases, the reader doesn't even realize that their expectations are necessarily being violated. These types of stories have a kind of retroactive predictability where there were a bunch of clues set out throughout the course of the narrative, and those clues don't really fit together until the very end. That creates a sort of satisfying unpredictability. That's what I think the best twists are framed around. The main thing to keep in mind is that you are always making promises to the reader, and those promises are going to create expectations. Dissatisfaction can only really come out if you were expecting something. So make sure you understand what the reader is expecting as they move through your story. Just like I'm satisfied that you moved through this entire video because we're at the end of it. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. If you want to financially support this channel so I can buy better lights and cameras and microphones and things, you can support this channel on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.